Well, now it's time to really get into detail, and we're going to talk our way through the show and discuss the methods and the thinking behind the routines, the histories, and a lot of information. In fact, so much information that I have invited some friends to help me with this project. And I'd like to introduce them. We've got Stephen Minch, the renowned author, Jean Matsura, who is a great historian of magic, Jan Rose, a performing mentalist, Eugene Berger, a friend and comrade, and Brandon Combs, who is sort of a newer member of this ensemble, but welcome to you, and welcome to you all. We're going to talk through the show, and I've got so much to say that I've actually got some notes here to consult, and your job is to help out, hopefully by jumping in with questions or clarifications or comments that will help make this as clear as possible to the viewer. The one thing I would ask is that when you do come in with a comment or a question, try and find a clean entry. So that, in other words, if you ask like a really stupid question, we can get an edit that isn't obvious. So in
other words,
so let's talk, if I may, about the actual start of the show. I mean, I walked on and I got to meet the audience. I said a few things that hopefully were intriguing and kind of set at least the start of the relationship, gave them a reason to think that it might be worth sticking around to see what this guy was going to do. And then I did my opening effect, which you didn't see.
And how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
Let me explain what I'm talking about. The opening effect of the routine that I did at the show was an effect that involves a psychological force. That if it hits, it's a strong bit. And if it doesn't hit, it doesn't exist. Now, I'm certainly not the first to have come up with the idea of things that either hit or don't exist, but I think I may have actually been the first to do so in a very formal way. In other words, there are many situations where a routine may have an opening for an extra payoff if it happens to come about. Or a routine may start off as a possibility of a strong thing and then dissolve into a joke. You know, when someone holds up a card and says, name a card, and if it's the card name, they've got a miracle, and if it's not, they make a joke about it. Well, someday someone's going to name the right card. But what I did, and this is back in 1970, the mid-70s, but published in 77 in the Red Book of Mentalism, I took a very formal approach to this. I said, I'm willing to risk having an effect that turns into an interesting conversation, and the effect itself is completely gone. And what I'm talking about here has to do with, somewhere it's back here, thank you, John, the ball that I threw out to choose the spectator. Because I snapped my fingers and asked her to name a color. And she said pink. But if you recall, I had this build-up about if we were meeting in other circumstances, I'd ask you some other questions to get to know you, but here I want to know how your mind works. And then when she said pink, I talked about what that said about her, that it matched her skirt, and maybe that had to do with, making instant decisions, whatever. It would have been different had she said a different color. And to show you what it might have looked like, we actually did some earlier taping, and let's take a look at an example of that. Well, Danny, as you can see, I have my working materials with me, a pad of paper and a pen. That means I'm either a mentalist or a psychiatrist. We can determine the actual answer when it's time to settle up the bill. At any rate, let's start off this way. If we were meeting in a different circumstance under social conditions, maybe I would ask you, what's your favorite kind of music? Or do you follow sports? Or do you have a particular author you like? In other words, I'd want to get to know you in various ways. But in this situation, I just want to know how your mind works. And I'm going to ask you a simple choice, a simple question, and this will tell me a great deal, even though it's simple.
Okay.
All right? So I'll snap my fingers, and you name the first color that comes to mind.
Blue.
All right. Now, I didn't tell you to name blue.
No.
You're wearing a blue shirt. Do you think that influenced you?
No.
Maybe not, because you're looking at me and I'm not wearing blue. So you'd agree that blue was a fair choice.
Fair choice.
Even though statistically, red is the most commonly named color.
That's true. Right.
So blue was completely out of my sphere of influence.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, you ought to turn over the pad and see what I wrote. Well, What this tells me is that you're going to be easy to work with.
I guess so.
In the context of this stage show, had the woman said the color blue, I would have had her uncrumple the paper ball, and there printed on the paper would have been the color blue, and that's a strong moment. Now, this is a psychological force. Let me talk about this for a second. I published this in 1977. In 1998, it appeared in the book Psychological Subtleties by Banachek. Now, Banachek's a friend, and I like him. But if he had asked me for permission to put this into his book, not only would I have given him the permission, I would have given him the real work on it. Because I've continued to think about this since 1977, and there's a little more going on. So let's talk about this. First of all, let's talk about why this force works, even though it doesn't work all the time. No psychological force does. That's by definition, I think. The phrasing is, and the timing is, I say to the person, with this build-up, first of all, of setting this premise that I'm going to ask them this question to learn about how their mind works, I'm going to say, when I snap my fingers and watch your name, the first color that comes to mind. Now, there's a pause there. And what I am hoping is going to happen, and what does frequently happen, depending on you and the group you work for, you may find it happens more frequently or less frequently. Maybe for you, you get a different response. These types of psychological forces can be affected by who you are and what you look like and the type of people you work with and so forth. But at least for me and for many people who've tried this, what happens is because there is that pause, because I explain you're going to name the first color, and then actually give you a moment, somewhere in the back of your brain, I think what happens with most people is they start to go for red, which is the most commonly named color, and then, maybe not even quite knowing it, they switch to blue as being a little less obvious. Whereas if I said, name a color, you'd be more likely to say red, but you also might be more likely to go with a color that you like for other reasons. So this pause and snap pushes the success rate higher. Doesn't push it to 100%. But I'm perfectly willing to live with that. You may not be, but I am perfectly willing to say, okay, we'll jettison the entire effect because I'm able to talk to the person and make some observation about what color they did name. Not only that, I have one more opportunity to maybe get it right, which is when the person says a color, if it isn't blue, I ask one other question. I say, now, is that really the first color or did you change your mind? Now, one of three things is going to happen. They're going to say, nope, that was the color. In which case, fine. I know I can respond by saying you're a person of strong convictions. You stick with what, fine. They can they can say, yeah, I did change my mind, which is kind of an effect. How did he know that? But they can change their mind to a different color. That's what happened with you, Gene. I did it with you earlier, and you named yellow, and then you said, well, actually, my first color was green. But I think it spooked you a little bit that I actually had said to you, but you changed your mind. So even that's a kind of a good effect. And I could say then something about so you're a little bit shifty here. You don't always stick with your first impression, and now I have to adjust for you. So it seems like there's a process going on here of interest. And of course, the other possibility on that question is, yeah, I did change my mind. Well, the original color, I thought it was blue. And when I get that, of course, now I'm home again with the effect. So I can up my success ratio, depending on all things considered. I would say maybe 70%, and that's I'll take that.
Well, yeah, I mean, people only know what they see, don't they?
Right.
But I'll tell you, when I miss a psychological force, I'm a little sad.
Well, maybe I have more chances to redeem myself. The basic idea of number predictions goes back to thousands of years ago, various number forces, mathematical predictions that have been around. Then the 16-digit test, which started surfacing in the 19th century, sometimes with slates that were gimmicked to change numbers, sometimes with switching pieces of paper. The earliest version of this in a magic publication seems to be, and I've actually got so many notes here that I'm going to consult them, a version by Frank W. Thomas in a series called Confessions of a Mind Reader in Stanyan's Magic in 1902. That and most versions after that involve somehow switching the numbers, and that has continued to the present day through Al Baker and Dunninger, and then later through Braut's Adeno and the various gimmick pads that are around. And in fact, there's some work on it on the VideoMind tapes. What I find to be fascinating is that this routine, which has its roots almost 100 years ago, seems to have been lost. Because in 1907, Henry Harden, wonderful and forgotten American inventor, the guy who invented, among other things, the princess card trick, came out with something called the Divination of the Nile. And in his catalog of 1907, he described it as the most perfect thing conceivable in high-class phenomenal mental effects. Pretty major claim, and I think he was right, which is even better, because it uses nothing but what you see. In the original version, the whole idea was to try and get the sum test, the addition test, done without switching papers. You gave out a prediction, and what happened was Hardin's instructions were that you gave a piece of paper to a member of the audience, and you had them write a single digit, and then another added underneath that, and added underneath that, and it kept going around. And you watched the numbers and totaled them as you went along. And so when you reached a total that was 9 or less beneath your prediction, so if your prediction was 50, once you reached 41, you took the paper back. Once you reached above 41, in other words, but not so much that it could go over. You with me?
Yeah.
And when you took it back, you said, you took the pen and you said to someone, "Now, give me your initials, and I'll initial this to make sure I don't change it." And in so doing, you added the necessary extra number to bring it up to your desired total, and then you put the initials there, and then you hand it out for addition. That was pretty good. That was not a bad method at all. We move on now to 1932, and Annemann publishes a book called 101 Methods of Forcing. You think it was 202. That's the one that came out a year later. But the original edition was 101, and the 87th, if I'm not mistaken, was the Nile divination, but with a change. And it's not clear if the change came from Annemann or from Harden or from someone else. It's described very briefly, but the change is you hold the piece of paper and have people, as you walk around the front row or whatever, have people call the numbers to you. And you leave a space after the third number. You leave a slightly larger space. And then when you get to the bottom and the point where you need to add the extra number, you draw a line underneath and then quickly jump up here and add the extra number in the gap. Now that's more sophisticated. It gets away from this initialing thing, which doesn't make a lot of sense. It does involve hopping up and down the paper a bit, and this gap is questionable because people sort of see it. So it's good, but it's not perfect yet. But I think it's better. And now we move on, and this is still with Annemann, and we get to Annemann's complete one-man mental and psychic routine in 1935. And here he adds something incredibly new and good to the Nile divination, which in fact he calls the new Nile divination. But in the same activity, he takes a step backwards with the method. The good part is he adds this incredibly clever sequence where a spectator thinks of a number, goes off in a corner and writes it on a slate in Annemann's original version, on a piece of cardboard in mine, but that's the total, which seems pretty amazing. But for the method, he went back to having people pass the paper along a row, and then he added the extra number with a nail writer. Well, as far as I'm concerned, even though I think the nail writer is a very useful tool, now you've suddenly added, you have to have that gimmick with you. You have to use it well. You've got some angle problems now that may be an issue. And you've lost what I think was such a nice direct simplicity with this. So what I did was to go back, years ago, I went back to the to this first Animan version of taking dictation from the audience, but I altered the situation of the space. Now, others, I think, may have done the same alteration, and I won't even swear that I didn't read it somewhere else. It's been so long, I don't know if this is my idea or not. And Stephen, if you remember a reference, jump in. I think this is my idea. But the idea is this. In a moment, we'll get to the big piece of paper and what's going on with that spectator. But here, I know what I want to force. So I go to the people and I ask them. Now, this is off mic. Here I had a microphone on, but in a show like this, I would leave the microphone. And I would talk loud enough that the audience could hear what I was saying, but not so loud that they get it strongly. And so they're hearing the numbers, and the people around are verifying that I'm writing the numbers that people are saying, so it all seems very fair. And when I get to about one place before I'm 9 away, so when I'm just over 9, so I know there's going to be, I'm probably going to finish it with one more number, that's when I put the space. So that the person who then gives me the number that I'm going to then add to get to my total, I write that a little low. And and because it's at the bottom of the list, it doesn't, even if they notice there's a gap there, it doesn't look as odd as putting a gap when you're only 3 down. So now, as soon as they've given me the number and I've shown it, I add the number I want and draw a line as I'm just turning this piece of cardboard to me to get to the obvious need of writing. So I'm not trying to hide anything. It's just here's a line and draw it. And I find someone to add up. Now, what this does, and what the original Animan thing does, that is missing from the original Hardin and from the later Animan, is it means that the last number called is the last number in the list. If you're filling in before the end. The risk on the original Hardin or an Animan's nail writer idea is that people aren't going to remember all the numbers, but if the last number called was 7 and they look and there's a 5, that's a risk.
Right.
But if the number above that 7 is a 5, that's okay.
Right.
So I'm clean. So now you understand this part of the game as to how we get to that total. Yes?
Yes.
All right. Now let's talk about how we get to knowing what the total is the spectator writes. And this is Animan's, this is not mine. But it's a beautiful example of his thinking and of a type of thinking that is not used very much. I got the young lady up, and after the banter about the color pink, I gave her a marking pen and a piece of cardboard. Now, just to back up for a second, this type of cardboard is a little thinner than I prefer, but I wanted to play fair and use materials that you find at a convenience store or a supermarket, and almost every drugstore or supermarket sells poster board of this sort in lots of 5, and it sells for anywhere from $1 to $2. So we're talking a pretty minor investment. You can also use a sketch pad or heavier cardboard, and certainly if you go to an art supply store, you can have a lot more options. But this is cheap and available. As far as the marking pens, this type of pen is the most common that you find, and you can usually find them in a pack of 2 for under $2, $1.50 or so. There are other options. I prefer, when I can find them, I prefer to use a water-based pen, because if you get it on your hands, or if a spectator gets it on his or her hands or clothes, it washes right out. Don't get this kind. That's got a pointed tip, and it does not make a very large line. What you want is a chisel tip, and they do exist. That's a chisel tip on a water-based marker. And on the permanent markers, just make sure you get a chisel tip, because that gives you the wider line that's going to be easier for people to see. I don't advise going for those Gigundo markers, because nobody can wield them. They're actually harder to write with, and people wind up using the corner of the nib, and you actually wind up with a thin line. So this is what we use. Now, a crayon will work, and it's also, I mean, you can get a whole box of crayons for $1, but if you're going to use a crayon, wear it down so that you got a wide, flat edge, because otherwise it's going to be too thin a line. All right? Okay. I gave these props to the young lady, and I walked her into the corner, and I had a brief conversation with her. And I said to her, I want you to think of a number, say between 30 and 50. I didn't have to give her a range, because technically the Nile divination works with any total, but eventually you run out of card. And if it's too small a number or too big a number, it may create hassles. So 30 to 50 is for me what the good comfort range is. For you, it might be different. So I said to her, I want you to think of a number between 30 and 50. What number do you want to think of? And she said 44.
Great.
And I said, okay, good. Then when I turn away and when nobody can you see what you're writing there, you write that number really big and concentrate on it and turn so that nobody can see it, and we'll see something interesting happen. Well, she gets a pretty good effect out of it, and the audience gets a great effect out of it.
But they're different effects.
It's not exactly the same, but that's not too shabby an effect. She named any number she wanted, and the total was the same.
Right, absolutely.
That's
The
right.
audience just gets a better effect because they don't know how it's possible that anyone other than this woman knew what the total was going to be.
Yeah.
So this is a situation of strategy and attitude. When I take her into the corner, that the audience doesn't know exactly what I'm telling her, but assumes from the scenario that I've said to her, think of a number and write it. I mean, they kind of get the impression of that. And then I actually say that later. I turn to her and say, I asked you to think of a number. I leave out the fact that I had it in a range from 30 to 50, and I leave out the fact that she told me what it was. And we get ourselves a conclusion. Clocks are something I think inherently interesting, and I don't think we tend to think of them as purely numbers, but rather as sort of capturing something ethereal, time. In magic and mentalism, clocks go back at least as far as Breslau's The Magic Clock in 1777. And there have been various versions of the clock dial and so forth. Let's not forget that Robert Houdin was a clockmaker at first. And in 1949, Bob Stull invented the Stull watch, which was a huge breakthrough of technology in a gimmick watch that could allow you to do watch predictions. And in the 70s, there was a flurry of watch tricks with people like Trevor Lewis and Dan Tong and Bev Bergeron, Art Emerson, and even then past that into the 80s with Rich Block and Steve Shaw and more recently Christian Fida and the Bizarre de Magia guys in Argentina. So clocks, I think, continue, clocks and watches, to interest us. Well, right in the middle of this flurry in the 70s and the 80s, in 1980, Al Mann, who had already entered into the watch effect fray with things like a routine called Death Watch, published a book called The Colophone, a rather typical title for Al, which included a routine by a fellow named Stan Alexander that was called The Dyad of Kronos. And I thought this was a sensational routine. It was a do-as-I-do with two watches that were unprepared, and it's a complete bluff. And I immediately started doing it and put a little bit of work into it presentationally. But the main body of it is Stan Alexander's, who I've never met, but who I tracked down and spoke to and got permission to put this onto the tape. So thank you, Stan Alexander. The idea is, to me, quite a lovely thing. We have two watches. They are borrowed. Of course, if you have your own watch, you can use it, but it's all the nicer if everything it belongs to the spectators. And so two watches, and they are, after being twiddled in front of you, they are twiddled behind you. Except that I twiddle in front and set my watch. That's what I'm going to write down. And now I put it behind my back and pretend to twiddle. And she twiddles. And then I tell her to bring out her watch face down, and I do the same. And we exchange watches. And I say, you look at whatever time is there, and I'll look at whatever time you twiddled to, and we look. Of course, I ignore what she's twiddled to because I'm going to write down what I know she's looking at. And then I say, now to make sure that there's no way I can peek and see what you've got, and no way you can peek and see what I've got, let's retwiddle. And I pull out the stem, and we change the times. Evidence is now all gone. The watches now can be given back to their respective owners, or if it's the spectator's watch, you can put it back on her wrist. Trick's over. We're going to write down our times, and they will be the same time. Now, What I do to give it a little bit of a dramatic build is I draw a watch face for her so that she's going to draw her time in analog format. I, on the other hand, am writing in this badly rendered digital readout. This allows me an ending which I actually had to alter today because what happened was she actually got confused about the time. She actually misread it because this fellow's watch was really busy. It had one of these things with extra dials and stuff, and so it was 2:49 or 3:49 rather, but she misread it as 2:49 or whichever it was or 4:40. Anyway, so the point is, in seeing this, rather than flinch, I said when she announced the time and showed her clock. If you go back and look at the tape, you will not see me, do any kind of take because I know I'm going to get home free. So the first thing I do is give her an opportunity to adjust her answer. Since I'm the one, I'm going to be right. I mean, it's my show. So I give her the opportunity to bail. I say, now, people sometimes get confused because, with whether the minute hand is above or below. So do you think that's actually 10 of 3 or 10 of 4? And I gave her the chance to fix it. And she chose not to. Fine. Then I carried on and said, well, people do get confused, which is why I went for digital. So the digital now seemed to be, in some ways, almost as if I knew she was going to be confused. So it seemed to actually enhance the effect. That isn't the line I normally use because normally she says the right time. In which case I say, I'm holding this with the number writing on it, and I would say, I have to be honest with you. I didn't draw the same picture you did. And now the audience thinks I'm about to announce failure. That I have 5:15 or something. I said, I don't have the same thing on my piece of paper. I went digital. And so it's a surprise moment that there's the expectation that I'm about to apologize for failure, and instead it turns out it was exactly right. And the reason I go digital and she goes analog, there's one extra reason, which is usually they're right on the hour. I mean, in this case, she really didn't know, but usually the hour is correct in her drawing. But the minute hand can be a little bit off because it's hard to be exact when you're not at exactly 5 of. And so if her drawing is a little off, I will massage the interpretation to be what I wrote. So if she said it was 10 of, and I had 3:49, before I turned this around, we would have gotten to defining this as 10:49, as 3:49. Just by during the course of talking, saying, so that's not. Was it exactly on 10 of? And she would have said no, because it wasn't. And I would have said so a little before or after maybe, and eventually I would have gotten her to say it was just a little more, and we would have gotten it. So I'll massage that. Usually I don't have to massage the hour, but as far as massaging the minutes, that's my job.
When you got to the end and you had to massage this thing, rather than doing a display of both cards side by side for comparison, you put your prediction in front as the focus.
Absolutely.
So
Because she had
softened it
drawn,
even more.
yes, and it's a good thing to bring out because I wouldn't have remembered to say that. But yes, because her drawing was literally off, that her hour hand was a little off, I put mine in front of hers. Had I gone to the ending as per normal, where her drawing was accurate to match the digital, I would have let her continue holding her drawing, and then I would have been side by side. But very good
And the
to
applause
notice
was
that.
very strong.
It was
on
really
that,
good.
very
You know,
strong.
Max, I think when I saw it,
Yeah.
I thought you were correct. And I think the rest of the audience thought you were correct.
I did too.
Because
Correct on what?
I'm gonna,
On the time.
I don't
On
know
the
if you were,
time.
if
On
you
the
Yeah,
time.
did this
yeah.
by design or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at that time, you first focused on the minutes. Was
Yeah.
it 49,
Yeah,
50,
yeah.
51? So people are thinking in terms of
Yeah.
the minute
Yeah.
hand. Is it pointed 49, 50, or 51?
Yeah.
Then you talked about the hour and
Yeah.
whether it's above 3 or below 3.
Right.
So now we got the minutes, 49, 50,
Yeah, yeah.
and we got the hour, we're thinking 3 because that's where it's pointing.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you said 3:49, it didn't
No, but
compute
but I'm watching her.
that it was 2:49.
And it was clear to me that she thought that she was thinking it was 2:49.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, and
But
I'd
I'll
have to go
bet the
back and
rest
check
of
the
the
tape.
audience thought you were right,
No, but
too.
but I'm watching
Yeah.
her face, and I can see that she's going, I didn't draw 349 or I drew 249. I don't want to get into a conflict with her. I have to head that off at the pass. I'm watching her because the last thing I can afford is to say that I went digital, and she says that wasn't my time.
Right.
249 was you're off by an hour. So I got that from her. I conceivably, had I done it, she would have acquiesced and said yes, they're the same. But I didn't want to take that risk. I'm bantering with her and I'm bantering with the audience, but I'm watching her carefully and I'm looking for tells that indicate that there may be anything that needs to be cleaned up before I get to that ending. I don't want to muddy that ending. By the time I turn my card around and it says 349, I want everybody in the room to be sure that you wrote 349, not just a lot of people. And so I'll take the extra time to adjust. This doesn't happen most of the time. Most of the time the watch face is more clear. But again, this show, we worked with what we got. And the fellow's watch was a very nice watch, but hard to read. It was very complicated.
That's very interesting.
The other thing that I'll point out, and then I think we'll move on this because it's pretty much self-explanatory, but this is that if you go back and listen to the verbiage when I'm doing the recap, I actually cheat the wording a little bit. And I refer to the time you set, and I make it sound more like she set the time and looked at her own time, and I set the time and looked at my own time, as opposed to the trading watches. And
Right.
it's not a grotesque alteration of the truth, but it nudges the truth so that later on people don't remember the precise procedure, and they have more of a sense of, yeah, she twiddled the watch, looked at the time, and he twiddled his and looked at the time, and they were the same.
Well, let's get to the astrology routine. There was a lot going on there.
Well, the background on that, I think, is kind of interesting. In the late 70s, around 77 or so, I came upon some interesting information about an idea that Dunninger had used. And I don't know where I learned about this, but I don't remember. But it was a wonderful example of how bold and just how much moxie Dunninger had. The idea was that he would do a routine where he got a specter up on stage. And at the end of the routine, he would send the person back to their seat, and then he would say, wait a moment, just have I got this correct? Your name is Stephen Minch? And the person would say yes, and people would go, oh my God, he's a gifted telepath. And what was going on was that when the guy came on stage, he would say, what is your name? It was a very standard greeting, when you shake someone's hand, and since the audience was applauding at the moment, and it was off mic, and the guy would say Stephen or Stephen Minch, whatever, and then he would wait, and at the very end of the routine, he would do this sudden moment of, wait, let me confirm, your name is Stephen Minch. And the guy would say, yeah, and everybody would applaud. And I thought, that's good. That's really good. But there was a flaw for me, which is that this will work in a huge theater. But if it's a small enough place that the people have a chance to really see this guy's reaction, it's going to ring false. Because when I say, let me confirm, your name is Stephen Minch, and you say, yeah, something's wrong here. Because you didn't go, holy, how did you know my name? So I thought, how can I make this? I love this idea. This is a wonderfully powerful idea. But how can I make this work for me? And so the first thing I did was to say, okay, maybe if I make it a little less impressive, it'll pass the test a little better. So instead of getting the person's name, which is really pretty out there, I mean, one of millions of names, if I just got their star sign, their astrological sign, that's 1 out of 12. It's less impressive, but maybe it's easier for the audience to buy. So I tried that. So when someone came on stage, I said, what's your sign? As I was shaking their hand, and since you sort of greet someone as you're meeting them, it was fine. So I said, what's your sign and what's your name? And by the time I said, what's your name, they'd already told me their sign, and the applause was dying down, and I was apparently just finishing asking their name, and they were telling me. So as far as the audience had a sense, I was just making polite comment, nice to meet you, what's your name? That was the audience's sense of the interaction. So now I know this sign. Now the question is, who did I get that information from? And the answer is, I got it from the woman who came up for the test with the watches. When she came up for the test with the watches, as I greeted her and shook her hand, I said, "What's your sign?" And I got the information, and now I was way ready for this. And then when we finished the watches, I said, "You know, you worked awful hard. Let me do something special for you, and you can enjoy it from your seat." So there's a sort of logical reason why I'm picking her to do this. Of course, the real reason is because I know her sign because I asked her what it is. And now I bring out the chips. Let me explain, first of all, when I first started doing the routine, I didn't use chips. I used cards that had astrological signs on them that had been marketed, and the handling was different than what I'm about to show you, and this is much better, in fact. These chips are actually not poker chips. They are children's counting chips, and you can sometimes find them in pharmacies, you know, the bigger pharmacies, in the game section, or you can also find toys that have chips as part of the game. And I've just written on them with a marking pen the names of the 12 signs. There are other options. You know, these chips tend to sell for $2 or $3. Other options would include, if for example the chip is darker, you can use a silver or white pen and write on the surface of the chip like that. If the chip has a very thick rim, the border is thick so that the area in the center is harder to work with, or in this case also there's some raised decoration, then you can buy little stickers and apply them, so that'll work. If you're preparing this at home and not sitting in the hotel room, you can use a printer and print out labels and make fancy little stuff for yourself. They also sell in a lot of stationery stores, and in fact, I've seen them in drugstores, these little metal rim tags, and all you do is take off that, and now you've got yourself a disc that's very easy to write on because it's paper, but it's got a metal rim, so it's got some strength. And then, you know, the simplest and easiest thing is just take one of your pieces of poster board and cut it up into little squares, and it will still work. Okay? So again, we're keeping our investment very low, and we've got our routine. Here's what's going on. I get the gentleman up, and I make a point of emphasizing we're doing this routine for the lady in the audience, and I make it, he doesn't know her sign. I never say I don't know her sign because I don't want her to say, yes, you do. So I just bypass that. I say, do you know your own sign? And he says, yes. And I say, but do you know her sign? And he says, no. And that's the only point I want to get across. And now I take out the bag and take the chips out of the bag and I show all these signs. Well, it happened that the sign we were going with was Pisces was in the show. So as I'm showing them, I get Pisces to the top of the stack and I say, do you know how to shuffle or mix chips? And he says, no, because most people don't. And I say, well, you take them in between your hands and you do this. And I've just palmed the Pisces chip. Okay? I just got it to the top and palmed it. And I say, cup your hands. And he does this, which is important because this sets a picture. This sets a picture that the audience is going to assume in a moment as to what's going on behind my back. I have the Pisces chip, which I just lost. Where'd it go? I have the Pisces chip palmed, and I dump these into his hands. And you can be the guy. And I say, now just shake them like a maraca. So I've got a good reason at this point to still not show my palm. And I say, and I'm going to put my hands behind my back and cup my hands. And now what you think I'm doing behind my back is what he did. You think I'm doing this behind my back, right? Yeah?
Watch your head.
What I'm actually doing, and this now we're in Charlie Miller territory, is this. Okay? So behind my back, it's this. So he dumps these onto my hand. As far as the audience is imagining, I'm showing my hands completely empty to him, and I have no, I can't be hiding anything. And yet, the actual situation is I've got that chip, all right? And then I say, I'll mix them up a bit myself, and I just slide my hand over and do this, but I've still got control over the Pisces chip, right? And now I'm going to make use of another bold concept. And this, I don't know the originator of this, but this is a force that was used by some of the old troupers, the old stage magicians who used to travel in the States in the first part of the century. And I know it was used by Virgil and by Willard and others of that ilk. And it was a wonderful force that was used in a stage situation. And it was the performer took a deck of cards and he shuffled the deck and he went down to the front row and he said, "You take a card and you take a card and you take a card." And what the audience assumed was going on was that he spread the deck and the first person took any card they wanted and the next one took any. And what he was actually doing was dealing the force cards. In other words, he had the cards he wanted to be selected on the top of the deck, and he would shuffle a little bit, and then he'd walk down to the front row and he'd say, "Here, you take a card, and you take a card, and you take a card." But nobody could see the activity except these spectators. These spectators were later amazed because the cards rose up out of the decks or in balloons or something. So it was wordplay. So in this case, I mix these, apparently. Remember, I've still got Pisces, and I say, "Here, take one." And I just hand him the Pisces chip. Now, as far as he knows, I don't know which chip is which, so he has no reason to feel that this is inappropriate. Apparently, I've grabbed a random chip and handed it to him. So his face, if you can see his face from the position, which I think you could, I haven't looked at the tape. I will guarantee you there's no registry on his face of him going, "Oh, this is hokey," because I'm doing something that apparently is quite fair. But the audience is making it better because the audience is assuming I had no opportunity to know where any chip was, and he took any chip he wanted from this mess. Well, I'm in a good position now. I give these chips away. He's holding this but not showing it to the audience. And I reiterate and reconfirm that he doesn't know her sign. And I ask her to reveal her sign. Now, she knows she's told me her sign, but she has no idea how it is that he picked her sign out of a random group. So she's got an effect. It's not exactly as good as the effect that everybody else gets, but it's a pretty good effect. He's got an effect. It's a little bit off from the effect that everybody else gets, but it's still a good effect. And the bulk of the audience has a great effect. And so when the sign is named, he shows the sign to everyone, and it's the right sign. Ah, but something else. There was a bonus effect this evening. And the bonus effect was
You got
that
his sign.
I got his sign.
Yeah.
How did I get his sign? Well, I go back again, as I so frequently do, to Louis Pasteur. Chance favors the prepared mind. I got his sign because he told me. He was surprised that her sign was his sign because he was a Pisces. And he thought that was actually part of the routine. And who was I to disagree? So he said to me, and if you go back and look at the tape, you'll see the moment. He says, "I'm a Pisces. And if you watch me, you'll see that I don't react. I don't give him any acknowledgement. I don't do this. Filed and noted. Now let me use some time misdirection. I now know that I know I've got an extra finish. But I can sell this as if it were planned. You know, and so this is some sort of karmic balance. You know, you were teasing me about the fact that the first effect had to be dissolved. Okay, fine. I got an extra effect out of this. You know, nature likes to balance things out, and I'm willing to go along for the ride. This was a lovely moment, and it's going to happen. Things like this do happen. So in this case, he provided me with an extra ending, and so what I did was I left enough time there so that I hadn't just been in conversation with him. I wanted to and I physically distanced myself from him, and then I said, "But wait, there's more. What is your sign?" Now, he, of course, had already come to the conclusion that somehow I knew. So when he told me, he thought he was confirming something. Because, in fact, after the show, he came up to me and said, "How did you know I was a Pisces?" So he'd already made the effect better for himself. And all I had to do was disagree with him. Yes, it was a better effect. Of course, I picked you because you were Pisces. So this is a situation where I wasn't correcting a problem, but rather taking advantage of an opportunity. And it's the same mindset that is going to take a troublesome situation where things don't go exactly according to plan, and where the spectator makes an error or an activity that means you have to adjust or massage. That same awareness enables taking advantage of opportunity when it comes up.
Max, one of the tricks that I liked the best in the routine was the trick with the 6 little bags. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason was that Eugene has done talks on this, talking about the old Confucian saying about the purpose of the journey, or the point of the journey is not the end point, but the journey itself. And that's exactly what we see throughout this thing. You're getting through a long process of elimination, but it's entertaining the whole way along. You have a line, you have shtick for
And that's-
every bag.
And that's actually what makes the routine a little difficult. It's actually a little harder than it looks. But I'll explain that. First of all, I should point out this routine is the bonus routine on the tape. So if you watched the what was labeled as the basic version of the show, you have no idea what we're talking about. If you look at the extended version of the show, there is an extra routine that comes at this segment, at this sequence in the show, involving 6 bags. So if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. It's called Just Chintz. So you'll want to find that and then come back and join us here. Okay, now everybody's seen it. Just Chintz is a variation on a plot that was developed by Tom Sellers, the brilliant Scottish inventor. It appeared in his booklet novel Necromancy in 1935. Originally, the title was I think It's Just Chance or something, but it became known as Just Chance, except in the United States, where in 1936 Floyd Thayer marketed a method and called it Bank Night, which had to do with a popular thing of giving away prizes at movie theaters to kick up attendance on slow nights, and those were called Bank Nights. So it was well known at the time. The effect is normally done with 5 or 6 envelopes or containers, and the idea is that everybody gets one and the performer gets one, and everybody gets crap and the performer gets money. And usually the contents of the envelopes that the other people get either have blank paper or they have insulting messages. You know, better luck next time. And this is dangerous territory theatrically, because it's very insulting to someone to say, let's play a game, but ha ha, you lose. So I love the plot. It's a wonderful plot. Everybody likes a lottery, a gambling game where you pick things. And so it's an attractive plot. So I have, over the years, come up with many methods and many presentations for this. But I always try to address that issue in one way or another. In fact, on the Video Mine set, there's a routine on one of the tapes called Goal Mine, in which the whole issue of money or prizes is eliminated. And that's one way of approaching this. This is sort of the opposite way, because here, the fact that they're terrible prizes is something that I'm apparently oblivious to. And there's a very sort of very funny presumption going on here that at least strikes me as being funny. It may not work for every performer. But I love the idea that I am congratulating these people with enthusiasm over these wonderful gifts that they'll be able to pick up after the show. And they're awful. They're used tissues and cigarette butts and just terrible stuff.
But not fully smoked.
Right. And the fun of it is coming up with bad gifts that have funny lines. And then technically, how do we make sure that I get the one that has the good prize? In this case, it was my watch, because I had that thing where I had set up far earlier in the show the thing that I'd lost my watch, and I did the minor self-deprecation of, I'm a big mental wizard and I lost my watch, just to plant the idea so that I could do the line of, oh, I was wondering where that was. And there was kind of nice closure in that callback. But I've used other things for the good prize. I mean, I've used a big bundle of cash, and I've used at one point I had some beautiful gold rocks that really gleamed and looked like the real thing. I lost them, but I used them on a television shoot and they vanished. But you can use jewelry. You can use it depends, almost anything. You can go with there's a fellow named Mark Garretts here in the Northern California area, and when I lectured this routine, he suggested that the last one could have half a dozen candy bars. And so you had a good prize, and then you realized there were enough to give one to everybody. And that's kind of a nice way of paying it off in a kind of friendly way. A little too friendly for me, but it would work for someone else. Or there's the Richard Osterland idea that's a terrific idea, which is that you give everybody a lottery ticket, so that the last envelope or bag could contain lottery tickets. the props, just to get through those
But there was
quickly.
something really satisfying when the watch came out. There was like a
Oh yeah,
beautiful moment
I like the
there.
idea that I get something
Yeah.
fabulous and
And the
pretend that
response,
everybody
yeah.
else got something
Right.
fabulous. I like that.
Well, I think
but
it's good in a
I
couple
think
of
this
levels.
varies for
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
performers.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, let's realize that I'm a cad. I mean, part of my character is caddish, and so the fact that I can blithely congratulate people for getting, you know, orange rinds, and then make it sound as if this expensive watch is the equivalent of an orange rind, and that we're all happy, is a pretense that is, I think, is funny, but that may not fit other people. But let's talk about the props briefly. First of all, the bags are free. And the reason they're free is because if you go into any convenience store, they will always have a stack of number 2 bags, which is what that size is, and it's a standard size in the United States. And if you're buying anything, or even if you're not, and you just say, "Can I have a few of those?" And they say, "Sure." And I mean, I've never had to pay for a number 2 bag in my life. If you are in a situation where you cannot find a convenience store that has number 2 bags sitting in a stack, you go into an actual grocery market or pharmacy, and you go where they sell paper plates, and you will find what are called lunch bags, which are slightly larger, but only slightly, so it's not so large that they take up too much table space. And you can get a huge bag of like 50 of them for $1.50. So we're still talking cheap. You've already got the marking pen, you can draw the numbers. If you want to get fancy and do stick-on letters or colored bags, that's your choice. But we're talking basically no expense here. All of the prizes are, you know, tissues and twigs and cigarette butts and stuff you can find around any hotel lobby or in your hotel room, or if you're staying at a friend's house, he's going to have tissues or toilet paper, whatever. There are other options. The orange peel, for example, you can usually have an orange at breakfast and just save the peel, or a banana. Worst case scenario, you spend 50 cents on an orange at a fruit stand. The Coke can, well, if you're like me and you drink soda in your room, then it's there. It's a found object. You don't have to pay anything. So technically, there's nothing to buy, because whatever the good prize is, whether it's cash or your wallet or it's already yours. You know, I didn't have to buy the watch to do the routine. So literally the only investment in this routine is the die. And the reason I put this on this tape as a bonus is because it fails the test of something you can buy in a convenience store and set up in your hotel room or something. Now, having said that, I'm about to teach you a method that you can do in your hotel room. But I'll explain why I did this version on this particular show. So let's talk about this version first, and then we'll move on. This die is gimmicked. And it is gimmicked in a way that goes back at least as far as the 13th century. It's gimmicked because one of the sides is duplicated, and therefore one of the number values doesn't exist. There's a 5 opposite a 5. All of the other numbers are there. But it happens, the layout of dice is that all opposite sides add to 7. So the 5 on any standard die is opposite a 2. And so if you fill in 3 more points, you can convert that 2 into a 5, and you've got yourself a forcing die. It's not a forcing die that forces a number. It's a number that it forces you not to get the number 2. You can't roll a 2 with this die. But because the 5s, the duplicated numbers, are on opposite sides, it's physically impossible to see them at the same time. At any time you're seeing one of the 5 surfaces, that means physically the other 5 is out of view. So no matter where anybody is viewing from their vantage point, they can never see the same number repeated. So it is a completely safe prop as far as any directional concern. Looking down from, can't be done. Physically impossible. It's the nature of viewing a cube. Now, I made this die, but that's because I was able to find a die that had flat spots instead of inlays. So it was quite easy to make. I actually made 3 of these, and one of them was professionally made. And if you look at them carefully enough, you'll realize this is the professional one because the dots are inlaid. And we've got a shape of die that's actually a little harder to work with, and actually this one is set to force to eliminate the number 4. But all of these, this was done with just a cube from a children's game, and some transfer ink, dry transfer ink. And on this, I found some very little black stickers that were used for some stationary device, and added the extra stickers to the 2 to make it a 5. And here the same thing, except I was using larger white stickers on a black die that had flat rather than inlaid. So it's not hard to find the dice and make them. You can also, for that matter, there are dealers that sell these dice for other routines, or if you can find a house that makes gaff dice, you can get it done. But it's not hard to make your own. It is hard to make one on the fly, because the odds are if you go into a drugstore or supermarket and buy dice, they're going to be what are commonly called drugstore dice, and they're going to be inlaid, and you just can't make it look good without tools or something. So let's talk about this particular procedure, and then in the next segment we'll talk about a variable procedure that you can make in your hotel room or wherever, okay? The procedure is simply what you saw, that people roll the die, and whatever number comes up, they take the bag and dump it out. The only thing that's difficult about the routine is to keep the pace going, and the further along in the routine you go, the more likelihood there is that they're going to be rolling repeat numbers.
Right.
And you cannot let the thing die by saying, well, just roll it again. No, roll it again. You never know. One of the good things about the routine is you're not touching the die, which makes it very powerful. The downside is only a downside if you allow it to be, and that is that it can drag. If you get an unlucky run and someone rolls several times and keeps getting numbers that have been used. The law of averages is pretty fair here, so you rarely get a very long run. You usually only get 3 or 4 in a row before you do get to a finish. But I have had longer than that, and I simply play with it. If someone keeps rolling unusable numbers, I can start making comments about their luck at gambling in casinos, I can ask them if they play craps. And if with this kind of behavior, how much do they lose? So I can turn this into something of interest, depending on the person. I don't have a preset. I have preset lines with the prizes, about I look at the twigs as a starter kit for a new house, or that the rind of the orange is where the vitamins are plus roughage. So these are lines I've written, and there are other. You're not limited to the bad prizes I suggested. You can come up with others, but those lines are written. But the banter with the people is not. I'm ad-libbing and bantering based on, first of all, who the person is, because if I'm getting up with someone who's older or who's got an accent or who's male rather female or tall or short, there may be some adjustment based on that, just on what it feels like my relationship is to them. But also it's how many times they roll. If luck is with me, most of them will get a usable number on the first or second go-round. If luck is not with me, well, I gotta work at it. Tonight, the show that we did earlier was pretty clean. There was a slightly long run toward the end, but not really long, and I don't think it dragged. But part of it is also that I'm keeping my energy up because of this absurd notion that this is a great game and that everybody's a winner. One thing I will say about the prizes, I have a different approach to bad prizes that I will show you in a moment. What I think is not a good approach to bad prizes, I've lectured this routine around the world, and there's been some discussion on the internet, and I saw some people suggesting that you use the kind of gag prizes like a diamond pin, where it's a dime glued to a safety pin, a dime and pin. To me, that ruins the pretense that these are good prizes, because that you had to sit down and figure out the pun. And glue the dime to the pin. So that makes it, I think, impossible to continue this pretense that you really believe these are great prizes and that they should be thrilled to get Kleenex. So I personally think it's a bad idea. It might work for someone else, but for me, it undercuts the joke. It makes the joke too heavy-handed. Whereas the idea that you dump out cigarette butts onto this sheet of newspaper and tell them what a wonderful opportunity this is because of the DNA or whatever. It's particularly nice. You used to smoke, and you saw me lecture several times where you were in the room, and I would say, and some of these cigarettes have Eugene Berger's DNA, and it got a big laugh because enough people knew Eugene. And if there, in fact, if you're doing this in a place where there's someone who is known to most people and who is known to be a smoker, then you can get some laughs out of that.
Well, one of the ladies who came today told me that she had my DNA, and I didn't get it, but she was a lady at a lecture.
She'd been somewhere and
Yes,
seen it,
yes,
and
yes,
so she
yes.
had your DNA.
Yes, yes.
Well, this has a shelf life of memory more than I thought. Well, I have great news because I'm going to play a game with all of you, and everybody gets a prize.
Uh-oh.
All right? And I put the prizes into envelopes. They're not all exactly the same size, but they all fit into an envelope. Here, would you mix them up for me, Brandon? Just give them a good shuffle as well as one can shuffle envelopes of this sort. You might want to try and guess what's inside, but I don't think you'll know. It's hard to, it's opaque and it's hard to make out the features exactly. So that one's a little soft. That one's kind of flat. This one bulkier. This one kind of a boxish shape. You know, so between all of them, they've got characteristics you might be able to recognize, but not enough to know for sure what's in any one. Right?
True.
Okay. So what I'll do is this. I will number these for easy reference, and then I will turn them so that the camera gets to see what's what. And so there we go. We've got all of the possibilities, right? And now, because I don't have any dice with me, we're going to create some sort of ersatz dice using some of my business cards, all right? So valuable souvenirs after the show. So let's do this. I'll write the numbers 1 through 6 on the business cards. So that's number 1, and that's number 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what we'll do is we'll paper clip these together. All right, and set that there. Okay, simple enough. We'll do a 3 and a 4. Jan, hand me a paper clip if you would. And we'll get those back to back. And thank you. Thank you, nurse. And we'll do a 5 and a 6. Okay? So guard that with your life. Actually, we're done with it, so you can just put it in your pocket. I appreciate that. And I will clip these together, all right? That works. Yep. Okay. And now I will give these kind of simulation dice to you, Stephen.
Okay.
And I'll ask you to take them behind your back and mix them, but as you mix them, you can turn them over so that you don't know which 3 surfaces are facing up. Fair enough? Okay. When I say now, bring out the 3 and set them onto the table in whatever condition they are. So we'll have 3 numbers showing. Now, deal them onto the table. All right. 2, 6, and 3. I'm going to let you choose which do you want, 2, 6, or 3?
I want the 2.
The 2. All right. So would you take envelope number 2 and open it up, and let's see what your exciting prize of the evening is. Oh, it's a shower cap.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, and it's a good thing you didn't get that prize, and you wouldn't have had any use for it. You've still got some time where this is viable.
Another 4
So
weeks, yeah.
so congratulations and enjoy it. All right, Gene, Stephen picked 2. We've got a 6 and we've got a 3.
3.
You want 3? Pick up envelope 3, and let's see what your prize is.
What is this?
Oh, skin lotion, skin
skin
cream.
lotion.
Good for you. This is nice stuff. Yeah, this is the expensive kind. All right, and it's sealed for your protection. Okay, Jan, you can either go with 6, which is the 3rd number that's even dealt, or
Right.
you can pick up all 3 and mix them around again. It's up to you.
I'll take 6.
You're gonna well, then let's see what number 6 is. Go for it. Wonder what it's gonna be then. This is... Oh, what very useful! You hang it on the door and it says "Do not disturb."
Good one.
Very practical. Good, enjoy that. Wear it in good health. All right. Here, let's go to Eugene. Put them behind your back and mix them again.
And I can turn 'em.
Yeah, you can turn them around, and when you're satisfied, you put them on the table. And, all right, let's see. Well, one wasn't used before, so go for one. Oh, that's a nice set.
That's
Look
very
at this. It's a whole coffee kit. It's a napkin and sugar and artificial sweetener and a stir stick, and it says enjoy with a picture of a coffee cup. Enjoy.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
Brandon, we got two options left, 5 and 4. Take these behind your back and mix them up and bring them out. Again, obviously turning them over as you do so that we wind up hopefully with one or the other of these numbers. If they're both there, you get to choose verbally. If what do we got? You got nothing. Do it again. All right. The idea is to turn them over until you get at least one of these numbers showing. All right.
Okay.
Okay. And how does it feel now? 1, 6. Oh no, we got 4. That one
got
works.
4.
Okay, good. That's kind of got some heft to it. So that might actually be a particular option for you.
French milled.
It's French milled
French
soap.
milled soap.
That's nice. That's French milled. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Fresh
yeah.
and clean as a whistle.
So my obvious choice is in this envelope, and oh look, I got a nightstand set. I got a ballpoint pen and a notepad. Oh, gee, but the notepad only has one sheet of paper on it, so I'll make do with it. So that's an alternative version of Just Chintz. Obviously, the presentation's a little different because, first of all, because I wrote the numbers in front of you, which was simply a question since I knew what the things felt like after Brandon had mixed them. I just found the one with the ballpoint pen in it and made sure that got numbered 5, which was my anti-force number. And then the other thing was for the bad prizes that it became obvious that they were all just things found for free in a hotel room, which
That's fun.
I find funny. I think it's funny, and I also think the idea that this is a pad of paper from the hotel, so it doesn't seem to actually be a better prize until you realize that the paper is a $100 bill. To me, that's comedy. To you, it's whatever it may be. No, don't put that down. You keep that. These are really yours. So let's talk about this diceless method, and I'll also talk about why I didn't use it in the show today. I didn't not use it because it was a bad method. I didn't use it because I felt there was a conflict because it involved writing numbers on pieces of paper, and we'd done writing numbers on pieces of paper. Now, as I said earlier, I think there is a fair amount of number stuff going on in that show I did. But it doesn't feel like it's heavy with numbers to, I think, the average viewer. I think the average viewer is taking away other issues of astrological signs and pictures and what have you. But the actual physical action of writing the number here is too similar to what's gone on before. So I wouldn't use this in the same show where I've done, let's say, the Nile routine. I would absolutely use this in a stand-up show without any qualms if it weren't juxtaposed. So that's the reason I put it on the tape as a bonus. I did the routine that you can't do fitting the parameters of this with the special die as a bonus routine. This is one that fits the parameters but doesn't fit the show. But that doesn't stop it from being a good routine. The solution here, let me talk about the background of that for just a second, and I will consult my notes. This idea, the original Just Chintz was published in 1997 in Ted Leslie's magazine Mind and Magic, and I used it a lot. I've used it on television, I've used it in performance, and I've lectured it. This is a recent idea, and this actually came about because of this project. Because I was considering material, and I'd set these really strict, rigid parameters that you had to be able to buy it for cheap in a pharmacy or supermarket, and the dice thing didn't fit. And I said, but it's such a good routine, and other than the die, it's free. In fact, I always have that die in my luggage, so that I always have it no matter where I'm going, even if I have no shows planned. I can do a stage pieces of almost 10 minutes that's funny and stuff, and that isn't going to cost me anything except a little scrounging around. So I said, okay, how can I work with this when I don't have a die that I can prepare? And I started thinking about some things that had been done in the past. And one of the things that occurred to me was an idea that John Cornelius had involving coins. And I don't want to go any further than that because it's part of a marketed trick that John is still selling. And I don't want to be unfair to John, who's still selling it, except to say that it was a very good idea. And that, in turn, reminded me of some ideas that were related to that, particularly a Marcello Truzzi idea, a brilliant idea called Heads Up that appeared in Magic magazine, with the K, the one that Bascom Jones did back in 1977, which in turn had precursors with cards by people like Di Vernon and Francis Carlyle, and it actually goes back to Hofzinser. So here's how it's applied here. I'm actually using 3 paper clips, which of course you can always find paper clips somewhere. I mean, they're always around. You go to the front desk of a hotel or raid your friend's desk drawer. And I'm actually using 7 business cards, which is how I'm going to get to the point that you won't be able to pick 5. Because I have pre-written a 6. And then all of these are blank when we start. And I never count them out. I just fan them out and sort of show the cards and then show the back blank sides. And now I take the pen and I draw the number 1. I draw the number 2. And I put them back to back, and it's very clear that I've done that. It's nice and fair. And I paperclip them together. All right? And I'm being very clean. Now I repeat. I draw 3, and I draw 4, and I put them back to back. And again, the same thing. But this time I asked Jan to hand me a paperclip. That wasn't accidental. I wanted to lead into the idea of something going on over here that would give me an option in a moment over here. Just a little split focus. And Jan hands me a paperclip. Thanks, that's great. And I show that. And now I draw 5 here. And I turn the 5 face down and draw a 6 here. So I've got a 5 and a 6. But I've also got an extra 6 behind that. By the way, if you're doing this at home, try and make them look closer to the same. It's not a big deal, but anyway. So now what I do is after I've shown this, I say, where are those paper clips? Because I know you're going to be ready with it.
Got
So
it.
I know it's not going to be on the table. I have essentially forced you to
be efficient.
to apparently fool me. Because you're gonna. I mean, if you don't, I'll simply look over here and say, where do those paper clips go, and pretend. But in fact, the likelihood is that since we've set up this idea that you're the paperclip handler, you're not going to get ahead of the game, and then I can say, where's paperclip? I've just done a half pass. In other words, the bottom 2 cards, which are now back to back, 5 and 6, are flipped over like that, underneath the cover card. This is done facing here so that the side of my hand essentially screens the action. Plus, there's other stuff going on. I'm talking to them, and I'm where's the? Oh, there it is. Thank you. Yeah. And now I've got a double 6 because I've got these 3 cards. But it doesn't feel particularly thick. I mean, the difference between 2 business cards and 3 is not a great deal. So now I play around and let you make choices, and you mix them up, and I've got the same situation as the die. Right? I've got an ersatz die that has no 5. And by kind of taking it, I mean, part of it has to do with when it's just like with the real die that sometimes you may have to get someone to mix them a few extra times to get to your finish, but eventually they will get there. And when they do, I was way ahead of the game, Brandon, because while you were busy picking up your thing, I was down here and just pulled this out with my thumb. Now, if I were wearing a jacket, I'd thumb it into my pocket. Here, I just threw it on the floor. But I'm done. I'm clean now. Because I got a 5 backed with a 6, a 2 backed with a 1, and a 3 backed with a 4. So not only are all the prizes distributed, but I can, and of course, keep my business cards as souvenirs and hire me for shows. So you end clean.
I did notice one small point that I liked at the end. There were some extraneous props left on the table
Yeah.
that you got rid of very efficiently. so that
Oh, so
was
that
focus.
so the $100 was
Yeah.
focused. That's simple stagecraft. I mean, it's stagecraft on a very small stage, but yes, of course. One thing that happens a lot, especially in close-up, is that people forget about keeping the viewing area clean. And what I see frequently is someone takes out a deck of cards, takes them out of the box, puts the box right here, and starts working. You know, and you've got this box that's literally in the way, and it's also aesthetically irritating. So if you're working on a small table, that doesn't mean that there's no choreography or blocking. It just means it's on a smaller scale. So yeah, absolutely. When I get to that $100, when it's the pen on the $100 pad, I don't want you looking over at the refuse. I want you looking at that moment so you all get it at the same time. $100, whammo, you know.
I knew the tidiness was calculated because I've been to your condo and I know it's not a natural.
You're getting much too personal now.
You know, one of the routines I love is the psychometry routine. It seemed like there was a lot of cold reading involved in it, but
Actually, I would say there's no cold reading in that routine, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about psychometry as a general concept, and then what I've done with it here. Psychometry, the term itself goes back to 1842. An American doctor of questionable repute named Joseph Rose Buchanan, who came up with the term, which literally comes from the Greek words meaning soul measuring, which is kind of heavy. And it's the idea that you can, you know, get vibrations or something from an object and know about its owner and its history. Its roots in a performance sense by false psychics or whatever goes back to the 19th century when there were mediums like Louis Schlesinger who used to do as a feature in their demonstrations, living and dead tests, which were very popular from the latter part of the 19th century up through about the 20s or 30s. And this was basically where people would write down the names of living people and then one dead person, and somehow you psychically divined which was the dead name, and sometimes told what the name was as a kicker. In 1907, Abbott, David P. Abbott, behind the scenes of the mediums, talked about living and dead tests, and this eventually evolved into psychometry, and we know that it did so in the world of spirit mediums, and then eventually filtered into the magic world, most famously by Theodor Annemann, who published Pseudo-Psychometry as a title in the Jinx #9 back in June of 1935. However, he was in fact preceded by several people, not only these 19th century mediums who were actually doing it out in the field, but even in magic publications. In fact, Stephen, you were the one who called to my attention that there's a routine, or actually two routines, in Roderberg's New Era Card Tricks, published in 1897, which is essentially psychometry. It's playing cards that are put into envelopes and mixed up, and then the performer divines whose card is which and gives them back. Now, the routines by Roderberg, and there were two methods, used 9 cards, which is an awful lot. Annemann's original routine used 12. 12 envelopes into which people put objects, and you gave them all back. So it was really a whole show. It wasn't a feature. You were doing the whole thing. William Larson Sr. also used 12 people and would literally do it as a full show. He did sometimes afternoon shows for ladies' tea parties and things, and he used this as the whole show with 12 people. Annemann's method for obviously the envelopes are marked. And that's how you find out how to give them to and you build off of that. In the Roderberg book, he gives 2 methods, and they are the 2 you would most expect. They are nicks with a fingernail or something, and punch, which is punching little tactile bumps. Both of those go back very early, actually. Nicks and punch work go back to 1552, Someone named Gilbert Walker wrote about it in England, apparently. And then Cardano in a manuscript written in 1564, but published much later. And then Galasso in 1593 in Italy, and so forth. So this idea was traveling around the gambling world as far as marking cards with these tactile methods for many years. Anneman's method was both clever and I think a little cumbersome. He wrote the number on the inside of the envelope, positioned such that when the spectator, he was using letter envelopes, and when the spectator put the item inside the envelope, they would not look down into the envelope and see the number because of its positioning in terms of the actions of opening an envelope. The flap was, if they were to lick the flap, they wouldn't see the writing on the inside and the opposite side. And then when he tore the envelope open, he tore the end off, and as he squeezed it open to get out the object, he could see the number. And so read the number as he took the object out. That's fine, but it takes a bit of work. And I also think that 12 is far too many. Mm-hmm. It's not too many if you're doing perhaps a full afternoon or evening of readings, and it's something closer to a John Edward type of thing, with just doing reading after reading after reading. But as far as an entertainment vehicle, I think it's much too much to go that many. And I think 5 is a good number. It's enough that it seems like there's a level of difficulty of distinguishing between things at the outset, and yet it's not so many that the owners is going, oh my God, he's got 14 more of these to do.
It would work at a Sweet 16.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. If it were the whole show, if it were the
Which is
whole
a good place
premise,
to practice this.
you would know better than I because I don't do Sweet 16 parties. But
Right.
but
But
it sounds it
it's
makes
a great
sense.
place
And I
because
and
those
if
little
if it was
girls-
done in a sort of kind of lighthearted
Right.
fortune telling kind of
Right.
pitch, I'll bet it would be a hit.
It's a great place because the girls, their egos, they want to hear about the other one, and they're all waiting. So it's just as entertaining to hear their own as it is to listen to everyone else's.
Yeah.
And at
Have
the
you
same-
done psychometry in those parties? Have you actually done it?
I would say in 1990,
A long time ago.
a long time ago.
But
It's
now
a
may-
great.
But you may start doing it
place.
again, or
No.
oh,
not
okay.
Sweet 16s,
Not
but I'm
not
just
even after you saw this.
merely jumping in.
I failed.
It's a great place.
Okay.
12,
All right.
16, 15.
The situation I'm using these clasp envelopes, and I use them for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're a little bigger than letter envelopes, and you never know what someone's going to get from their pocket. In the show today, we had a cell phone, which might not have quite fit into a letter envelope, but it absolutely fit here. So that gave us just a little more leeway in finding objects in people's pockets. The envelopes are marked, Eugene. You were saying you didn't know. In between takes, you were saying, how were they marked?
How were they
Because it was
marked, yeah.
sealed.
Yeah.
Well, they were sealed and then unsealed and then sealed again. I don't know if the camera
with
can pick that
Scotch
up,
tape.
but that's closed with Scotch tape. But that, of course, is on the back of the container.
I feel dirty now.
In 1975, Tony Raven, writing in Invocation magazine, came up with the phrase "the virgin state principle," and the idea was that if you had props that still had the price sticker on it or were still in a sealed bag or whatever, the audience would accept the idea that they were in a virgin state, that they hadn't been tampered with.
And I did.
And you did, and it's an effective idea. I think you can go overboard with it. I mean, actually, I was thinking it might be funny if everything in the show today, the magic markers and the poster board and everything was torn apart. And then I said, you know what, there's going to be a pile this high of refuse, so I decided not to. But this actually works nicely. I took these out of this is a set of 5. They do come in different quantities, but it's pretty easy to find a brand that sells in sets of 5. Or if you find a bigger stack, you just mark the first 5. I mean, there's no reason to say you have to use all of them, but I think this is kind of tidy that you use everything. And I marked these, and then by simply cutting off the bottom of the envelope, and then I folded it back up and then taped it into place. And of course, I kept it facing the audience. I mean, this is not subtle. But I took out the envelopes, and then I just tore this open. Well, now, once we get down to here,
Right.
it's crumpled, so you can't see the tape because it gets absorbed into all of this, and that's just history. And now I have my envelopes, and they're all marked, and they're all ready to go. They're in order. And the marks that I'm using, now there are different systems of marking, and in fact, Tony Raven again wrote an essay in 1978 in Invocation called Raven on Psychometry, which largely was suggestions for different ways to mark the envelopes or the containers. This was later expanded into a booklet. There's, of course, the T.A. Waters booklet on psychometry from 1981, which not only discusses different markings, but also different presentational ideas, and it's a really solid piece of work, which is contained in the large Mind, Myth, and Magic collection that you published, Stephen. And various people, and in the literature, there have been perhaps hundreds of methods of psychometry, some very clever ones from James Randi, from Larry Becker, from Fogel had a wonderful version using bags called Second Spot. Here, my marking system couldn't be simpler. I've taken pencil dots, and I put them on the back sides, the address sides of the envelopes, because I know people are going to be putting things in this way, so they're not going to be paying attention. If they do happen to look at the back, there's not a lot to see, because it's just a little pencil dot here in the corner. I don't know, can the camera pick that up? Good. And this one is over at the left. And so the next one, number 2, is marked about 1/5 in.
Okay.
And then we move on, so that the next one has got its mark in the very center. And then the next one is most of the way over, and then the last one is at the end. So the opportunity to mark these, and I mean, you can use more exciting and subtle marking methods, but there's really no, I don't think there's a need. I hand them out, I'm handing them out from the face here, so that the marks are not in view, not that they're likely to be seen. If they're seen, it's going to look like a blemish. I mean, manila envelopes are rarely perfect exactly. So I would hand the envelopes out, and of course I'm handing them out in a sequence that I can remember, because I want to make sure that I know who has what. So I just go from I'm remembering the people and their names, but I'm also going from my left to right, just so that I've got a pattern that I can go back to mentally. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as simple as that. Okay.
Are you doing a male, female, or how are you decide?
I want a mix of about half and half,
Okay.
and we'll get to that in a second. By the way, just for what it's worth, as I was handing the envelopes out, I nicked them. They're all marked twice now. They're marked with the dots, but also look.
Right there on the face.
There's a nick right there that tells me that's envelope number 2. So you can literally take a bunch of envelopes out of that aren't prepared, and nick them on the fly, and do it.
The only time I've ever done psychometry was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And when at a ladies' club, and when the envelopes came back to me, there were so many crunches, and I couldn't read the names.
Right, but that has to do, I'm sure, with the type of envelope you use. That you probably use a lightweight kind of stationery. These are pretty substantial, and this nick is a pretty strong nick. I mean, that's going to be hard to miss. And
the dots.
Well, in fact, I use the dots and I prefer them, but I'm pointing out that you can even do this literally on the fly. So these are now closed with the stuff inside, and I want to get the read on the people. Now, in this particular routine that I did today, I had my split was 3 men and 2 women. I would be just as happy with 3 women and 2 men, but I want to make what I'm going for with this routine is to get some sense that it goes somewhere. That it isn't, okay, here's the first demonstration. I tell something about the person and identify them. Now I'll do it again, now I'll do it again, now I'll do it again, and now there's only one left, so it must be yours. That doesn't go anywhere. So how do you get to a finish? And how do you get a sense of going? Well, what I've done here is I've put this basically into, it's actually 3 phases and then a bonus routine is how I think of it. So it actually fits the rule of 3 in a sense, because the first 3 people, that's a complete piece. And then with the last 2 people, I sort of do a different routine, because that's when I bring out the blindfold. So let's talk about the blindfold part later, but let's talk about the first 3, all right? In the first 3, it's less a question of picking which ones. I'm not being that particular about my order. I'm making sort of a judgment on the fly as to who I might have fun with first. For example, we had the kid with the cell phone. I didn't know what he'd put in the thing, but I was guessing it was probably funny because he had done this thing of saying, "I don't have anything." "Oh yeah, I do." And so I kind of expected it might be something funny. So I said, "Okay, I'll save him for second, because that way, if the first reading is a little flat, I've got the novelty of the reading itself, the idea that somehow I got vibrations off of this object." See? So the first thing, by its definition, because it's novel, because it's the first time, I can afford to sort of go weak. So I went with a kind of weak outset. I don't remember what was the
ring
object.
was the first
Oh, it was a woman. That's right. It was 3 women,
It's a
two men. No, it was 3 men. Still 3 men. But that's right. The ring was the woman. But in fact, I looked at her and she was far away. I knew I didn't want to bring her down for the blindfold, and I also thought she just didn't look like she had put something interesting in the envelope. I just didn't have a feeling that she was a wacky lady, you know.
No, it was nice. The
So,
friendship ring was a good
so the first thing was kind of a mild thing. Now, I do not consider what I did there cold reading. And since I do cold reading, I think I speak from some authority here in terms of when I say it ain't cold reading, it ain't. What I'm doing here is simply talking about the person under the guise of getting vibrations or something from the object. And I'm simply making observations about the person. You know, I looked at this woman and I looked at the ring, and it's a nice ring, and it looks like it probably costs some money, and so it's probably a ring that was involved with some romance, or it turned out to be a friendship ring. But so this isn't cold reading to say that I think this ring has a history. It's not just something you bought for yourself. It didn't look like a ring that you'd buy for yourself. That's not cold reading. That's just paying attention. You know. I did talk, if you notice, I made a big point of talking about how men can wear, the ring could have been a man's. In fact, if you look carefully at that ring, there's no man that would wear it unless he was wearing a dress to go with it. But I wanted to convey the idea that it wasn't that obvious, simply because it was. So I wanted to convey that it was a little more difficult than it was. And so I told a few things and then gave it back to her. And now several people have pointed out, and T.A. Waters was very emphatic about this, that most people, when they do a psychometry routine, it becomes so much about giving it back to the right person that it defeats the whole point of what psychometry is, that the idea that you're getting something about them. So what I'm trying to do here, although I changed gears on the kid because of the funny thing with the sticker, and so with the kid, I just said, I don't have to use any psychometry here. None of these guys would have this phone. This is yours. And it was funny, and we got some play out of it. But for everybody else, I was trying to give the sense that I was getting some impression from the object, and then saying, okay, now that I know that about the object, which of these remaining people is most likely to fit what the object just told me? Which is not the same thing as saying, let me find the person.
But just one
Yeah.
second, not to whisk away what you did with the cell phone thing, which I think is really something we should just talk about for a minute, because I think it's important. When you do get an object in a routine like this that is so obvious,
Yeah.
I think what you did is a beautiful moment, and the audience loves you for it.
Well, sure, because if I tried to make them think that it was impressive,
It's
that I'd
insulting
figured
to
out
them.
that the cell phone with
It's
that Mars sticker or whatever it was belonged to one of the older guys, it would have been insulting. It would be stupid. So I just had fun with it. And that's fine. You know, one of the things that happens sometimes when you're doing a read of someone, you know, in a telepathy kind of demonstration, as you know, is that sometimes they'll blurt out an answer. You'll say, think if your card was red or black, and they say red out loud. And that can be a very funny moment. And you say, you know, it's going to be more impressive if you don't actually say it out loud or whatever you say. And you can turn it into a moment instead of going, oh, God, you screwed it up now. You told me it's over. It's ruined. So obviously you want to kind of keep on top of these things. But in this case, I saw the thing and immediately said, okay, I'm going to have fun with this one, which was kind of what I expected because I had put the kid second on purpose. Expecting that there'd be some novelty value to whatever it was he put in the envelope. And then when I saw that it was so obvious, I played with the audience and said, you know, how psychic is this, or whatever I actually said. I should point out, by the way, that I also, one of the things I was doing was talking about the weight of the envelopes. And there's a reason I was doing that. And that's how I was glimpsing the marks. See, if you look down at an envelope to spot a mark, that can read, that can telegraph across a big theater. You know, why do you study the back of this envelope? Well, first of all, I'm holding the envelopes up so that you can see the front of the envelope. So apparently I'm displaying it for you. But second of all, I'm saying, you know, this envelope has something very light in it. And now I have a perfect reason to look at the envelope because I'm talking about it. And so this happened during the routine. If you go back and look at the tape, you'll see over and over again, I'm picking these things up and I'm saying that these have different weights. And as if, I mean, what it seems I'm doing is simply saying, you know, you can tell a little bit without opening the envelope, but basically you really have to open the envelope to see what's in there. But the real reason is it gives me an opportunity to do a glimpse with a motivation to look at the envelope. So it doesn't look like I'm studying the envelopes. It looks like I'm looking at the envelope to talk about the feel of what's inside of it. Okay?
That's a clever trick.
Well, glimpsing is something that is hard to conceal. People telegraph glimpsing more than almost anything.
They're in the headlights.
Yeah, well, because usually they have no justification for it.
Right.
And they seem to think, as with much sleight of hand, that if I just do it really quickly, no one will notice. But, you know, that's very noticeable. It may be quick, but, you know. So, again, the whole idea here is to give myself a reason to look down at the envelope that doesn't register to you as having any importance because it connects to something I'm already doing. So that now we're up to our we've done our second person. And the novelty of giving back stuff telling people about themselves and giving back stuff to the right person is starting already, I think, to wear thin. Just a little bit. Now, this would not be the case if I were really doing full-out cold readings. But I didn't want to do that here. First of all, that's a much too complex topic for us to discuss on this DVD. But second of all, this was in the context of a larger show, and I didn't want to go, 10 minutes on each person or whatever. I could, but then we'd be here. I would start to overstay my welcome. So I wanted to say just enough stuff to be interesting and to have people say, oh, that's interesting. It doesn't seem to be necessarily obvious, because apparently I'm getting it from the object and not the person, remember. But not so much that it's sort of like, okay, get on with it. So I go for my third person, and my third person I want to be a woman, because I'm going to do this piece. I'm going to say something about her personality by initially getting it off the object. In this case, it was a chapstick, which allowed me to say some interesting comments about the nature of chapstick being transitory, but her relationship to chapstick was, I was improvising. I had no idea what the object was going to be. But once I did, I was able to tie it to knowing what this woman looked like and saying, yeah, I could see her being a person who's like, takes extra preparations. And of course, as I'm saying this, even though I haven't yet identified her, I'm keeping an eye on her as I'm looking around the room, and I'm looking for tells. And if I'm saying this is a person who takes a lot of care in what they do, a lot of preparation, and if she starts rolling her eyes, because maybe her apartment looks like mine, then I'm going to change gears. I'm going to switch gears and say, she plans. Now, she doesn't actually get it right, because she stumbles and gets caught up in too many plans and gets boggled. And at that point, I would think the woman would probably sort of go, oh, he does understand me, So I'm actually gauging her by sort of checking in. I'm not looking at her all the time, because I don't want you to know that I've already decided it's her. But as I'm looking around the room and talking to everyone, I'm actually reading her. And again, this is not cold reading. This is simply paying attention and making educated comments about what type of a person this is. It skirts the edge of cold reading. It is not cold reading.
Which is also a nice choice, though, to keep the people in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you that advantage that as
Yeah, if they
you-
were on stage, I wouldn't be able to see them, because they'd probably be behind me.
and your audience would see them
And
would-
might see them nodding or what have you. Exactly,
and
yeah. Yeah.
So you did just
The
you
opposite.
gave
Right,
yourself the
right.
advantage and not the
Right,
audience.
absolutely.
Which was a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
I thought, wow, this is great.
Thanks.
Okay, I like
And then we get to this moment which I find really interesting, which is having identified her from the vibrations from
Mary,
her chapstick, I say, I have something I need to tell you. And we have this, again, we're back to this secret, and it's only for her, it's not for the audience.
Can you tell us
and
what you told her?
Can I tell you? Yes. Will I tell you? No. That was
Why
all,
not?
because I told Mary it was just for her.
Can you give us
And you-
No, because you're tantalized. You really want to know.
And you will see Mary
and
on the tape.
all the
nodding,
people who
nodding,
were
nodding,
there
nodding,
are
nodding.
taking that home, and some of them are sitting up right now saying, "What do you think he told her?" And she was nodding and must have been right.
Well,
And he asked her,
don't-
"Did it make sense? And could she make use of the information?" And she said, "Yes." So there was a relation. We're back to this whole thing of relationship. There was a relationship going on there that was very private and intimate,
Right.
and it's Mary's private information.
And it didn't matter that it was
Tell
a chapstick.
Jan something different, but in the same vein.
No, what I will do is I will answer. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you what I said, but what I will tell you, I will read a proverb that I think sums that whole moment up. Si kohaimo me pachivalo sar o chashimo.
Of course.
See, see, you thought there was going to be no
I'm
explanation.
not even going to tell you what language that is, but I swear to you, if you manage to break that down, you will understand exactly what I was talking to the woman about. Now, we get to the end of this third phase, and essentially, really, the psychometry routine is over. Now we're actually doing a mini blindfold act with the last two guys. The only thing I want is I want the people in the last two to be the same gender. I want the person I whisper to be a woman, because there's that more of a sense of not so much a sexual thing, but more of an intimate thing in the context of a heterosexual world. But I want the last two people to be of the same gender, because if the objects, I'm not going to be looking at the objects, but I'm going to be holding them. And if the objects are decidedly masculine and feminine, then the audience is going to go, well, duh. So that's the one case. So depending on the spread of genders, I'm just making sure my last two people are either both women or both men for that reason. So in this case, we had two guys, and that was fine. And I got them up. Now, of course, I didn't open the envelopes, but they were still marked, so I knew which was which. And I could feel what they were. I didn't know exactly what they were, but I knew one was flat and one was bulky. And the bulky thing was a finger ring, and the flat thing was a key, and I knew, therefore, I knew that Mike's key was whatever it was. I didn't know it was a key, but I knew it was flat, and the bulkier thing belonged to John. And so now, when I handed these both over to Mike and said, "Now take them out and put them in my hands behind my back," I'm home free as far as knowing who's got what or who belongs to what. Now we'll get to the blindfold for a second. The blindfold, first of all, as far as the expenses on this, assuming you buy the envelopes, we're talking about $1.50 for $1.98 or something for the 5 envelopes. As for the handkerchief, if you don't already carry a pocket handkerchief, then you might want to reconsider some of your personal hygiene choices. But if you don't, or if the pocket handkerchief you carry is too small, because some of them are, too small to get around a human head, or at least my human head. Most drugstores somewhere in the back carry bandanas, and these come in a variety of colors, even occasionally black, and the pattern isn't too garish, and sometimes you get lucky and find something even simpler than this. But this is certainly viable, and these bandanas are actually very large, so they're very easy to fold up, and there's plenty of tying room. So that's another investment of under $2. Now, what I like about adding the blindfold here is that it gives the sense that we're somehow upping the ante, that we're making it more difficult, and that we've moved on to something new, as opposed to just doing the same thing again. The idea of going with the last two people together was William Larson Sr.'s. In his version that was published originally as a Thayer manuscript, and then later in the 80s it was published by Bill Larson Jr. in the Collected Writings book that's still out. It's out of print, but it's still available, and it's terrific. And Larson's routine ends with getting the last two people up after he's done 10, and saying, I'm going to give these back. No, wait a minute. I feel I should switch. So it gives a slight dramatic moment, and he switches and then gives them back, and the people say, yes, they're mine, and he's done. And I felt this was a very good thing, because if you're down to the last one, if you've given back all 11, or all 20 or whatever it is, except for one, then the ending is foolish. Now, this is one of the reasons why in 1976 in the Blue Book of Mentalism I published a routine called Desire, where at the end, the last one, instead of being simply handed back, you actually telepathically read the person's mind and tell them what they've written. And there have been many related things that have been in print and marketed. But in this case, I didn't want to go there because I was going to be using that as the final routine of the evening. So I went with this business of mixing them up behind my back, and then I could have done it without the blindfold. It still works. But mix them up behind my back and stand up one on each side of me, and I'll tell you a little bit about what each one of these gives me, and that means it should be right. You take them, and if I'm right, go back to your seats. Which is kind of the Dave Hoy tossed out deck finish. If I'm right, sit down. It's a good moment when several people acknowledge that the outcome is correct, and by either sitting down, standing up, moving, doing whatever it is. It's a nice moment because the audience fills in the ending and it feels good. With the blindfold, of course, I'm using a nose peak. This is hardly a new idea. The nose peak shows up at least as early as in Guyot, or is it Guyot?
I do not know.
This French guy who wrote a book called Nouvelle Récréation in 1740 and had a card stab in it in which he describes a blindfold with a nose peak. The nose peak is, I'm sure, even older than that, but it goes back at least to 1740. It's almost impossible to tie a blindfold around your head without having a nose peak. And so all I've got to do is, as I'm talking to the guys, I make slight turns of my head, which look natural. I don't do huge turns, but I'm if I'm talking to the person on my right and left, there's a natural behavior there. Now I don't have to see the whole guy. I don't have to go, look like this. I'm getting it off his shoes and pant legs. And this goes back at least to the 20s and probably earlier. But mediums in the 20s were making use of this for blindfold tests, that they would memorize quite a number of sets of shoes, and then people could even walk up behind them and they could get a peek down past their own feet and catch the shoes and know who the person was. So in this case, on the side, I don't have to do a great deal of turning. I'm talking to the people in a very sort of casual way, and when I give them the opportunity to move around and change places and all of this, I'm still keeping track of who's where. And then I get to my finish, and I use the Larson idea of starting to give them, no, wait a minute, it feels better this way. Just builds up that moment, but then because it's blindfolded, and there's the taking off the blindfold, and how did I do if I gave you back your objects, you can sit down again. To me, this is a much more dramatic build-up. So we're building on what Larson had into something that actually creates an effective ending. And this is, in a way, it's a whole miniature show. It's got a 3-act show tagged with a major encore piece is sort of how I look at that. So it's a way of taking a basic one of the classics of mentalism, something that's been around and used for 150 years, and not making it radically different and new, but simply trying to make it theatrically more eventful, so that it goes somewhere rather than simply establishing a premise and then repeating it over and over and over again. This is a magazine test that is designed to be very loose in the sense of there's very little preparation, there's no real money involved, because you can take magazines that you were going to read anyway, or magazines that you subscribe to. You can take the freebies off airplanes. You can take, in airports or hotel lobbies, they have magazines that are kind of more catalogs than magazines, which is all right. This is a guide to Nevada this is a film festival guide. This is the L&L publishing catalog. I only care that one of these is a real magazine. I'm going to use 4 magazines, and the only one I care about is the one the person's going to wind up looking at. So I need to get 1 or 2 magazines that are real magazines, and the others are basically filling out the 4. 4 seems to me to be enough to give a sense that there's a lot of magazines as opposed to only a couple. So I have 4 magazines, and one of them I have memorized the contents of 10 pages. Now, why 10? Well, because we're going to use a ranging force. In other words, we're going to limit the possibilities of pages that can be selected. Now, if I were to say, all these magazines run about 100 pages, so give me a number up to 100, that means there are 100 choices. 100 pages, right? I would have to know the information on 100 pages. And you can index 100 pages of a magazine. There are a lot of ways to do it, but that takes a fair amount of time, and especially if it's a magazine you're going to toss away, give to the Spectator, and have to do it again next week. I'm not sure it's really warranted. Over the years, people have figured out ways of narrowing down the number of page choices in a way that doesn't feel quite as restricted as it actually is. If, for example, I get you to name a number, a two-digit number from 1 to 100, but make it a two-digit number, I've now eliminated those numbers, so that's 10. If I eliminate duplicate numbers, if I say, give me a two-digit number, but make the digits different, that eliminates 10 more. Now, that sounds a little odd to say make the digits different, so if I split it among two people, give me a digit from 1 to 10, and give me a different digit. That sounds reasonable in a way that asking one person to make two digits different doesn't. So I'm pushing it down. I'm down around the 80 mark. I get rid of the zeros, and now I'm down to 72. If I decide that I get to choose the order, give me a number up to 10.
4.
I mean, 4. Give me a number up to 10.
8.
And if I'm the one who gets to decide whether that means 48 or 84, I cut it in half and I'm down to 36 choices. That's pretty functional. Back in 1970 something, I came up with this notion that I thought was pretty good of playing this thing of shooting fingers, because that limits it to numbers 1 to 5, because 0 is not presented as an option. You have to shoot some fingers. And that brings it down to 10. And I thought I was a very wise and clever lad. Some years later, I found out that I was beaten by an earlier wise and clever lad named Ray Hyman, who in the linking ring in 1953, in a book test called It's in the Book, had essentially this. There was some very tiny microscopic differences, but essentially this idea. This is something I happened to find years later after the fact. Well, Ray is a bright and interesting guy, and a lot of the stuff that he had in the linking ring back in the early 50s was way ahead of its time. So I don't claim to be the first to come up with the idea, but I think it's a good idea regardless, and I think it's very useful here. Here's what's going on. I've got 4 magazines, and so whatever 4 they are, I'm going to force one of the magazines on the Spectator. And I'm going to do this with a man because he's going to have to bend down. This will be different if I'm on a theater, because I like throwing them on the floor. You don't have to. I could do a classic force on these. I mean, you can actually do a classic force with magazines. But I like the idea of tossing them on the floor because that really says he's not doing anything. It's out of his control. And the man's, if it's on the edge of the stage, someone can come over and from a standing position do it. But if it's a guy sitting in the front row, as it was here, it's impolite for a woman to make her bend over like that. I mean, chivalry and such may be antiquated, but it still exists. And in this society, at least, it could cause problems. Particularly if the woman, as was true of the front row, some of the women had very short skirts and they might have gotten embarrassed about getting into an awkward physical position. So I had that guy pegged from the beginning. I said, okay, there's my guy in the front row, and I can get him to bend over and pick stuff up, and he's not going to feel put out. I show the magazines, in a wide fan. The Force magazine I put here, second from the top. But I, as I'm showing the magazines, I do a sort of gesture, and so as I put them back together, I now put my Force magazine on top, and as I drop them at this guy's feet, I push them together. So when I say to him, just bend down and pick up a magazine, what I'm hoping is that he's going to take the path of least resistance and pick up the top magazine, and that I can say, oh, you picked any one you wanted, but you picked that. Now, sometimes they don't do that. In fact, in this case, he almost went for the top magazine, and then he grabbed the second magazine. Now, at this point, I had a couple of options. I could have said to him, take a look at the magazine and make sure that it's legit. But he started to go for a second magazine before I even asked him to, so I led him on with that and said, or take another, and he did. So now he had 2 magazines, and one of them was the Force magazine. Well, now I was home free because I had another guy already pegged in the back row, and he looked to me to be viable as a candidate to do the reading. So I told this guy in the front, hand one of the magazines back to him. Now, as it happened, he handed away the magazine I didn't know anything about. Okay, good. So we'll use the magazine you've kept for yourself. If he'd handed this one back, good. Sir, when you receive the magazine, make sure it's different. You can keep all the magazines in the front, but we're going to use the one you sent back to the guy in the back, and I'll read his mind. So we're using equivocal technique, but long distance. I'm not touching anything. And as long as it's done, I think, in a casual style, I'm comfortable with it. And I think with 4 is not a difficult number to accommodate. So we get down to the one magazine. Now, of course, there's no reason why you can't prepare more than one magazine. And there's no reason why you have to go with mnemonics, even though it's only 10 pages and it takes about 10 minutes if you're used to this sort of thing. There are loads of ways that you can put together a cue list, and 10 cues, since you only need 1 or 2 words to know what's on the page. 10 cues can fit onto something that's about the size of a matchbook cover. In fact, in the Parasite manuscript, I offered a dozen or so ways to hide indexes, some of which I don't think anybody else has ever come up with. And for the sake of those who have actually spent money on the Parasite manuscript, I won't divulge all of those to give them at least something to hold on to. But I will say that one of them, which you can't use anymore, was on the inside of a matchbook, and back in the 70s, you could actually smoke on stage, and I didn't, but some people did. And so you could actually light a cigarette and get your information from the inside of the matchbook. But you can also have a little palmed card with the index on it. You could have the index on the large piece of cardboard that you're going to write on. Now, that means that you can't give it out at the end, but that's not the end of the world. Or you could have it on there, with Post-it material so that you could pull it off. There are lots of places to hide indexes on the side of the Sil Riley idea of on the side of a crayon or marker pen. So indexing the 10 pages is pretty easy. But frankly, if you have any experience with mnemonics, and it's a useful tool for any mentalist or for people in general, it literally is about a 10-minute task. The only thing you want to do is you want to go through the magazine and see which is your better set of numbers. The ones with the lower number first, or the ones with the higher number first. Usually it's the ones with the higher number, because the early part of the magazine usually has a lot of ad pages with no numbers on them and a lot of editorial pages with few pictures. So if you go with the higher number first, that's usually your better set. Because what you want to find is first of all, you're hoping to find pages that you can talk about in some way, that you can get an image that's likely to be interesting or something. And the second thing is, you want to make sure they can find the actual page. Not every page is numbered, but you can't go in and write in with pencil or something what the number is, because then it's clear that you've worked with the magazines, and you want the sense that you just sort of grab these. So you want to make sure that any of those 10 force pages, which, in case we're not being clear here, would be, assuming we're going with the higher number first, would be 21, 31 and 32, 41, 42, 43, and then 51, 52, 53, 54. There are your 10. And you want to make sure that none of them is too far away from a page with a number. So that if, let's say, page 52 doesn't have a number, page 51 or page 53 does. And it's not hard to find that. When I grabbed the magazines for this, I looked at the Newsweek and I looked at the Us magazine, which was the one the guy walked out with the magazine, so I don't have it to show you. But the point is, I looked at the two very, very quickly, and immediately, as I started looking at the Newsweek, I found a bad patch of unnumbered pages. I said, let me see if the Us magazine's better, and I looked and I said, yep, I like this. So I was done. And that whole process before the memorization took literally less than a minute. And then I just went through the pages and locked them into mnemonic phrases, and I had them. And I ran through them a couple of extra times and looked at the pages a couple more times leading up to the show. But really, the total amount of time invested was very minimal. And again, you don't have to memorize it. But boy, talk about not having to depend on props. This is a pretty good prop if you can carry it. And 10 pages isn't such a great amount. once you've got the information, obviously the idea is to feed it back in an interesting way. And one of the keys here is to have a sense yourself of what the person's looking at. Now, this page that he happened to get had a bunch of pictures on it.
Right.
And when you look at a page full of pictures, you tend to scan them all. You don't settle on one first, you look at a whole bunch. So I told him that. I said, you're looking at a bunch of different people and stuff. And he said, yeah. And I said, a bunch of different pictures. And I said, someone's holding someone or something. Well, actually, there were 2 or 3 pictures, and it was a whole page about parents and kids. So it wasn't that rough to figure that there was a picture that he was looking at that was someone holding someone. But to the audience, it sounded like I was getting really specific. And then I went a couple of other things, and then said, "You're looking at that horse." Well, the horse was really the standout image on the whole page, so he had to be looking at the horse at various times. And of course, by saying you're looking at the horse, either he was, or he just had, or he'd noticed it and was planning to come back to it. So when I said you just looked at an animal, it was close enough for him to say, yeah. Well, we've come to the end of a rather long journey, and I really hope you've enjoyed it and gotten something out of it. I certainly have had a great time doing it. I want to thank my various friends who helped participate in making this production come to a reality, and also to Louis and the gang here at L&L, and all of the guys who work on the crew and the editing and all of the stuff that goes into making this. You'd be surprised how much work is involved. If there's one thing that I hope you get out of these DVDs, in addition to hopefully some ideas that you can use and some techniques that you can appropriate and make use of in your own way, it's the attention to the history of these ideas. Because mentalism, as with the larger surrounding art of magic, as with the larger surrounding art of art, is like Soylent Green. It's people. And if we remember the connection between the people who created these things, then we are closer to the source and closer to the actual investment it takes to make this stuff mean something. I think you're probably familiar with the classic quote from Einstein, that the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. Well, I'll up the ante. I'll give you a quote from the legendary Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca, when he said, "Only mystery allows us to be human. Only mystery." So with that in mind, I'd like to thank you for watching and say, oh, actually it isn't time to say goodbye because there's an extra feature we haven't given you yet. So what I want you to do is to watch the credits and then take out this disc, put disc number 1 back inside. When the menu comes up, click on Copyright Information. And what you'll get, instead of the copyright information, which is already clear, is you'll get to see the entire show done again, but this time with a voiceover commentary track by me in which I will point out to you many things of fascinating, detailed information. So enjoy that if you would, but don't forget to watch the credits. These people have worked hard to deserve your attention. Goodbye.